But white people, they don't want white, a genetic recessive trait, to disappear. So I have spoken to audiences of white people and asked them, do you want your children to be colored? Do you want your grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-great-great-grandchildren to be colored? I'm polite and they're polite. What do they say?
Hello guys, welcome once again to our channel. I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time.
Because the big, huge problem of racism, this man had found the key that we're dealing with a total system. So then from that point, I started wondering, well, why would a group of people who call themselves white, why would they set up such a system on this planet? Not in Washington, D.C., on this planet. And one day I was in my apartment, washing dishes, cooking, and the brain computer came with a printout. And I started thinking, see, if you put a question in your mind, why? You were telling your brain computer, bring in data to answer the question. And little children magically understand that. Because when they're 2 and they begin to start talking and thinking, and they keep saying, why? Why? You see, and grown-ups get annoyed, but the child is trying to understand cause and effect on this planet, in this world that they have been brought into. So I had been saying, but why would they do it? Mr. Fuller would say, Francis, it's not important. Why? Just learn what they do. But I was still, as a psychiatrist, but why would they do it? So I started thinking about some of the things that people who classify themselves as white would say about black people. The first thing, they were always saying that they were genetically superior to us. How many people remember hearing that? Like all the time. So I thought about that. The other thing that I thought about was they referred to the people of color on the planet, the black, brown, red, and yellow people, all of them having pigmentation due to the black pigment melanin, that they were minorities. And so I started thinking, wait a minute, in other words, I've been in their schools a long time. Number one, they are a tiny minority. They are fewer than 1/10 of the people on this planet. Instead of black people being genetically inferior, black people are genetically dominant to people who classify themselves as white. The ability to produce the black pigment that causes our skin to have coloration is a genetically dominant trait. If anybody doesn't understand what I'm talking about, all you have to do is think about our president, Barack Obama. His mother was white. His father was black. Black is a genetically dominant trait. White is a genetic recessive trait. A dominant plus a recessive always equals a dominant. So there's no way a white person plus a black person is going to get a white person. They had an opportunity on all the plantations to study that for hundreds of years. Never come up with anything other than a shade of black. So once that came into my brain computer, I really said, I've got it. That's the answer. You know, I didn't tear up my kitchen, but I said, that's the answer. Because during the 15th century, everybody knows about Columbus sailed, the first person out of Europe to begin circumnavigating the planet. Well, many other so-called explorers and discoverers came after him. What they found out was that every place they landed, there were colored people. Colored people everywhere. No white people other than that tiny, tiny area across the Mediterranean, north of Africa, that is called Europe. And so then the men on those voyages, if the women were either subdued or if they were extremely hospitable, after there was sexual contact between the white men and the women of color, and they waited around 9 months to get their boats repaired, they found out that all the children ended up looking like their mothers. And so I don't know whether they built a big institution to study genetics. Basically, really, they didn't have a major science of genetics at that point. But they realized, what if these colored men of color got in their boats and started going from south to north and descended on Europe? And that's happening today.
That's right.
They understood that if this happened, if this was allowed to happen, that's why a lot of the black people who were trying to get into Europe, they let the boats drown, or let the people drown in those boats. But they realized that white would disappear. And so I said, this is the answer, and this is the key to racism. I mean, people are accustomed to saying and thinking racism means you can't use this water fountain. You can't sit on this toilet. You can't shop in this store. Or you can't do this, or you can't be in that hotel, and on and on and on. But underneath all of those surface things is the awareness on the part of people who classify themselves as white, that they could be genetically annihilated and they could disappear. I maintain that Abraham Lincoln, when he emancipated us from formal enslavement, Abraham Lincoln concluded that he could not make the black people social equals of whites, because he understood, even though he didn't talk about it openly, that if everybody was allowed to do, and this is Dr. Martin Luther King's home state. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about people should learn how to love and respect and only focus on character. But imagine what would have happened if all the people of color and all of the white people in this area of the world and even throughout the world, if everybody just embraced. And, somebody like Rodney King said, why can't we all just get along? Now, those are wonderful ideas. But if everybody just loved and everybody just got along and nobody paid any attention to skin color, what would happen? White people would disappear. Now, some black people may not understand how important that is to white people. Because black people under white supremacy have been trained to want color to disappear. But white people, they don't want white, a genetic recessive trait, to disappear. So I have spoken to audiences of white people and asked them, do you want your children to be colored? Do you want your grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-great-great-grandchildren to be colored? I'm polite and they're polite. What do they say?
No.
No. So I simply say, if you mean that, then you will have to do certain specific things in all of the areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, to prevent that from happening on a planet where the people are overwhelmingly black, brown, red, and yellow. And this is what the people who classify themselves as white are doing that is responsible for all of the discomfort that we experience as black people, as black women, as black men, as black children. And what is very important for us to understand, and I say that racism is war against black people in general, but black men in particular.
Now, I did a little research to understand the role of black people in the American system, and this is the summary that I got. The role of black people in the United States is deeply interwoven with the nation's history and development. From the early colonial period through the present day, black Americans have been central to the country's economic, cultural, and political fabric. Historically, the arrival of enslaved Africans in the 17th century marked the beginning of their profound yet tragic influence on American society. Enslaved black people were integral to the agricultural economy, particularly in the South, where they worked on plantations producing tobacco, cotton, and sugar. Despite the brutal conditions of slavery, black Americans developed rich cultural traditions and communities institutions that have persisted and evolved. We see the history of black people in America, and we know how slavery led to their disenfranchisement in many aspects. This led also to what we call the segregation that made a certain race appear more superior to another. Blacks were looked at as people who are only good to work in plantations and not to work in formal offices because they thought they were not good enough. But if you look at the history as it has been told by Dr. Fraser there, you'll be able to see that blacks have been the owners of history. They existed 20,000 years before the white man came into existence. And this is something that must be appreciated at all levels. The struggle for freedom and equality has been a defining feature of black Americans' roles in the nation. The abolitionist movement, driven by figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, was pivotal in ending slavery. The Civil War and the subsequent passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments marked a significant shift, granting freedom, citizenship, and voting rights to black people. However, systemic racism and segregation persisted, necessitating further struggle. So despite the fact that there was a generation that fought for black people to get some innate freedoms that every human being has, there are certain things that did not go well, and they did not get their freedom in totality. There are certain things like segregation and systemic discrimination that was happening within various American institutions. So these institutions saw that blacks were not supposed to be permitted to do certain things, regardless of the fact that they got all the rights that other American citizens had before. They did not qualify to handle or do certain things as per the whites in the American system. They still did not qualify to do certain things as has been demonstrated. The 20th century saw the emergence of civil rights movement, a transformative era spearheaded by leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks. This movement led to landmark legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed at dismantling racial segregation, and disenfranchisement. Culturally, Black Americans have profoundly influenced American arts, music, and literature, from the Harlem Renaissance, which showcased talents like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, to the vibrant genres of jazz, blues, and hip hop. Black cultural contribution have shaped the broader American identity. So, if you look at the field of arts, if you look at the field of literature, you will find that there is a sense in which Black culture has influenced the literary field in America. It has also influenced the art aspect in America. So, music, as we have seen, different genres, we've seen even the form of writings. People like Maya Angelou were Black people who have been very, very vocal and transformative in the fields of literature. Politically, Black leaders have increasingly shaped policy and public discourse. The election of Barack Obama as the first Black president in 2008 was a milestone reflecting both progress and ongoing challenges. Black political figures, activists, and intellectuals continue to address issues such as racial inequality, criminal injustice reform, and economic disparities. I think those who are also speaking very vibrantly on issues of economic disparities includes one Louis Farrakhan. In contemporary America, Black people play vital roles across all sectors, including education, business, entertainment, and sports. Their contributions are critical to the nation's ongoing dialogue about race, identity, and injustice. While challenges persist, the influence and leadership of Black Americans remain central to the country's development and cultural richness. So this is something that is quite profound. Blacks in America remain very, very pivotal when it comes to the nation's growth and sustainability. We have seen that they have made significant contributions to almost every field where they have touched. So when you want to understand America, you must at some point try understanding the Black people and their culture and their presence and even their role in what we see today as the civilized America. That is the end of the video. If you're watching us, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Also remember to give us your opinion down in the comment section so that we may also understand your perspective about the issue. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.